My name is Rachel Monroe, and on January 14th, 2018, my life changed forever. I was a nurse at St. Mark's Medical Center in Ohio, living what I thought was a normal life. I believed in God, I went to church, and I prayed, but my faith was routine, something I never really questioned or went too deep into. Looking back, I can see now that I was spiritually asleep, unaware of what was happening around me. But in the months leading up to that night, something inside me started to change, and I didn't understand why. I began to feel a strange urgency in my spirit, like something was coming, but I couldn't explain it. My prayers became more intense, and I started waking up in the middle of the night with a deep need to pray. At work, I noticed people acting differently. Patients seemed more agitated, coworkers more distant, and an unexplainable heaviness filled the hospital. It was like a darkness was creeping in, but no one else seemed to notice it. At the time, I brushed it off as exhaustion, stress, or just my imagination, but I realize now that it was a warning. Then came that night. I had just finished a 12-hour shift, exhausted and ready to go home. The parking lot was almost empty, the air freezing, and the streetlights buzzed in the silence. My mind was occupied with everyday thoughts, what I needed from the store, whether I should call my mom that weekend, and how tired I felt. I wasn't thinking about danger, and I never saw it coming. As I reached for my car door, I felt it, a sudden, overwhelming sense that something was wrong. Before I could react, I heard footsteps behind me, fast and aggressive. A hard object struck the back of my head, and I collapsed onto the pavement, the cold concrete biting into my skin. Voices surrounded me, angry, demanding, and I tasted blood in my mouth. I wanted to fight, to scream, but before I could, a boot slammed into my ribs, then another and another. The pain was unbearable. And then nothing. The pain was gone. The cold, the fear, the sound of my attackers, it all vanished in an instant. I opened my eyes, but I wasn't in the parking lot anymore. I was surrounded by light, but it wasn't like anything I had ever seen before. It wasn't just bright, it was alive. It wrapped around me, filled me, and for the first time in my existence, I felt completely at peace. There was no fear, no confusion, only an overwhelming sense of love and understanding. But something was different. Time itself felt strange. It wasn't moving the way it does on Earth. It was like I could see past, present, and future all at once, though I couldn't fully grasp how. Everything was clearer, more real, as if my entire life before this moment had been lived in a fog. And then I heard his voice, not just with my ears, but deep in my soul. It was powerful yet gentle, filled with authority and love. The moment he spoke my name, I knew exactly who he was. I turned, and there, standing before me, was Jesus Christ. His presence was unlike anything I had ever experienced. His eyes, they weren't just looking at me, they were looking into me, seeing every part of who I was, yet I felt no shame, only love. But there was something else in his expression, urgency. "Rachel," he said, "I have brought you here to see what must soon take place." Before I could even speak, everything around me shifted, and suddenly, I wasn't standing in the light anymore. I was above the earth, looking down, and what I saw filled me with a terror I cannot describe. A great darkness was spreading across the world like ink spilled into water, reaching into every nation, every city, every home. But it wasn't just darkness, it was deception. I saw people blindly following leaders, believing lies that were woven so carefully with half-truths that even those who claimed to know God were being deceived. Governments, media, even churches corrupted. The world was being prepared for something, and I could feel the weight of what was coming. Then, from the heart of the darkness, he appeared. A man, charismatic and full of wisdom, beloved by the world. But I knew exactly who he was, the Antichrist. At first, he didn't look evil. In fact, he looked like everything the world had been waiting for, a leader who promised peace, unity, and solutions to all of humanity's problems. He spoke with authority, and his words mesmerized people. Nations adored him, world leaders welcomed him, and even many Christians were drawn to his message, believing he was sent by God. He spoke of love, acceptance, and progress, but something about it felt twisted. It was love without truth, unity without God. I watched as people willingly surrendered their freedoms, desperate for the peace he promised. But it was all a lie. Then I saw a second figure, the false prophet. He worked alongside the Antichrist, performing miracles and signs that convinced even more people to follow. Fire fell from the sky at his command. The sick were healed, and those who doubted before began to believe. He spoke of a new kind of faith, one that united all religions under one false god. Churches that once preached Christ now compromised in the name of inclusion. The Bible was rewritten, its truths distorted to fit the new world order. Those who refused to conform were labeled as dangerous, intolerant, and hateful. I wanted to cry out to warn them, but they couldn't hear me. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A global system was put in place. At first, it seemed harmless, even beneficial. It started as a new economic system, a way to solve world poverty, stabilize governments, and ensure fairness for all. But it quickly became something else. No one could buy or sell without taking a mark, a sign of allegiance to the Antichrist. People lined up willingly at first, believing it was just a new form of technology, a way to participate in society. But then I saw what happened to those who refused. They were shut out of the system. No job, no food, no medical care. Many were hunted down, imprisoned, or executed. Families were torn apart. Friends betrayed one another out of fear. But through all of this, I saw something else, a remnant. Small groups of believers hidden away, refusing to bow to the new order. They were poor in the world's eyes, but I could see the glory of God upon them. They had supernatural provision, food multiplying in their hands, prayers being answered in miraculous ways. While the rest of the world was trapped in deception, these people were completely free. I saw these believers living in secret, gathering in small homes, caves, and hidden places, whispering prayers, reading from torn pages of the Bible, and strengthening one another. They had nothing by the world's standards, yet their faith was unshakable. I watched as they faced persecution unlike anything I had ever imagined. Some were arrested and given a choice: deny Christ or suffer the consequences. Many stood firm, refusing to deny their Lord, even as they were led away. I saw families torn apart, friends betraying one another, and the world turning completely against those who followed Jesus. Then, my vision shifted again, and I saw war. Nations were rising against nations, and the world was spiraling into chaos. There were plagues, disasters, famine, and people running in desperation, looking for hope in all the wrong places. But even in the midst of the destruction, the Antichrist grew stronger, gaining more power, more control. The false prophet continued performing signs and wonders, convincing the masses that this leader was the savior of the world. The deception was so strong that even some who once followed Jesus began to fall away, believing the lies, thinking that they were on the right side of history. And then I saw the armies gathering. It was the final battle, the one written about in Scripture. I saw kings and rulers coming together in a vast valley, their forces prepared to make war against God Himself. The place was Armageddon. It was terrifying to see weapons drawn, soldiers marching, leaders speaking with arrogance, believing they could stand against the Almighty. But then, suddenly, the sky split open. A blinding light unlike anything I had ever seen flooded the earth, and I knew Jesus had returned. He was no longer the suffering servant. He was the conquering king. His eyes burned like fire, and on his head were many crowns. The armies of heaven followed him, clothed in white, riding on white horses. The moment his presence filled the sky, every lie was shattered. The Antichrist and the false prophet were seized, their power stripped away in an instant. They screamed, fought, resisted, but it was useless. They were thrown alive into the lake of fire, their reign of deception over forever. The armies that had gathered to fight against him stood frozen in terror. Their weapons were useless, their power meaningless in the presence of the King of Kings. Then, with nothing but the breath of his mouth, Jesus struck them down. There was no great battle, no long war. It was over in an instant. Every deception, every false promise, every lie that had enslaved the world was completely destroyed. The earth itself trembled as his justice was carried out, and I saw the beginning of his reign, a kingdom of truth, righteousness, and glory unlike anything this world had ever known. Then, as suddenly as it began, the vision faded and I was back in the light. Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with both love and urgency. "Rachel," he said, "you must tell them. Tell them to prepare. Tell them to stay close to me. Time is shorter than they realize." His words burned into my spirit, and I knew that I couldn't stay there. Though I wanted nothing more than to remain in his presence, I felt myself being pulled back, drawn back into my broken body lying on the cold pavement. I gasped for air as I opened my eyes, the sounds of the hospital parking lot rushing back all at once. My ribs ached, my head throbbed, but I was alive. The doctors later told me that I had been clinically dead for over 10 minutes, yet somehow, there was no brain damage, no lasting injuries. They couldn't explain it, but I could. I knew that God had brought me back for a reason to share this warning, this message, this truth. I couldn't stay silent. I don't share this story to create fear, but to wake people up. The world is changing, deception is already spreading, and the time to prepare is now. Do not wait until it's too late. Draw close to Jesus, know his word, and refuse to be deceived. If you've made it this far, I believe you were meant to hear this message. Do not ignore it. Surrender your life to Christ, stand firm in your faith, and be one of the lights in the darkness. Because when that final battle comes, you will want to be on the right side. If this message spoke to you, share it. Comment below, tell your story, and make sure others hear this warning before it's too late. Jesus is coming back, and the time is short. Stay strong, stay faithful, and most of all, stay ready. If you've experienced anything similar or feel a stirring in your spirit, let me know in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more testimonies and warnings. Time is short. Let's prepare together.